Thank you so much for the opportunity, Jake, to be here today, for the invitation to talk about the issues that are impacting, obviously, future industry decisions. Just to give a little bit of an overview for folks, our vision at EHRC is to build the world's leading electricity workforce, and that is one that's going to power our nation's grid, ensure reliability, a word you heard earlier, and support a clean economy for future generations. What we do is we deliver the critical business intelligence to inform the labor market decision making and lead the industry in creating and sustaining a safe, a skilled and inclusive workforce. Our unique value is that our partners, our members include employers, educators, labor, policy makers, amongst others, working together to identify and forecast workforce priorities and then find practical solutions to the most critical talent issues of the day. Examples include attracting more youth to the industry, diversifying the sector, building out HR best practices, and mapping the skills and competencies that are required to support employer needs. Now, with technology advancements creating new career fields, so think of energy storage and EV charging infrastructure specialists, and then we have automation replacing old ones. So the physical inspections is now being replaced by drones, for example, in the field. It's essential that our employers and our educators are empowered with the data needed to develop effective HR tools, the resources, and the relevant training programs that are required. And we also want to make sure that our career seekers can make informed decisions as to their education and their career path. When I spoke here last year, we were still in the midst of the pandemic, so experiencing those unending restrictions and balancing work and life to manage through it all. And while we are thankfully in a much better place, we are still feeling the ramifications, of course, of that experience. As anyone who's flown in the last 6 months will know, the aviation industry is struggling to bring back workers and lost suitcases, and the tourism industry is in a similar position, with many closing down due to not lack of business, but the lack of staff. So why am I mentioning other industries? Because the electricity sector right now is in a war for talent. Everyone is struggling to find workers at the moment. It's the #1 issue we are hearing about from our members. We're leaving behind what was a fairly stable, steady state workforce that has been roughly the same for the past couple of decades. That's both in skills, competency mix, and relative size. But change in the sector, as I see it, has been driven by 3 factors. So technical innovation and adoption, climate change, and seismic demographic shifts. So let's start with the demographics and the current state of the workforce. The electricity industry in Canada at last comprehensive count was 108,000 people. And again, that number has been relatively steady since EHRC's research division started tracking back in 2006. Now, the sector's retirement rate pre-pandemic was almost 3%, 1.5 times the national average, due to the volume of older workers in the sector, many who've been there for 30 plus years. We know the pandemic has had an impact on retirements, and we will be delivering our business intelligence findings on that later this fall. We will be releasing our latest labor market study then. But further evidence from Statistics Canada over the last few months has shown that the upward trend line for retirements across all industries, again, is accelerating. It's headed in the wrong direction at a time when we are all feeling the pinch. Just this past December, there were 823,485 jobs, unfilled jobs across the Canadian economy in all sectors. Last August, that number actually hit 1 million. So we're seeing unprecedented job openings over the last year. The unemployment rate across Canada, across the economy, was down to 5% in December. Now, while the R word is being mentioned more and more, recession, And we are currently seeing significant tech layoffs globally. I know you'll all have seen that in the papers over the last few weeks. I do think that on the jobs front, at least, that landing will be soft and that there's enough tightness in the current marketplace to absorb those layoffs. Paul mentioned cybersecurity earlier. We're going to need more and more data specialists to support the possible implications of our digital technologies. Inflation is another pressure. You mentioned that earlier. It is a pressure for employers in a volatile economic climate with a low employment rate. That does add to compensation and flexibility expectations for employers. So that is a pressure that we are watching right now. And then lastly, some interesting context about this industry, which is different from many other industries in Canada, and that's the average time to full competency to perform in many roles in this sector can be anywhere from 5 to 10 years. Just 80% of the workforce requires highly technical skills to work in the industry. Tradespeople, engineers, technicians, technologists, and that provides a particular challenge that is unique to this sector that many others don't experience. In order to plan for big changes, we need to be able to plan 5 years in advance minimum if we're starting from scratch to train new workers. That's going to take coordination from employers, labor, policymakers, and educators to make sure that the system remains reliable, resilient, and safe. So important. And trust and confidence in Canada's electricity system, of course, needs to be paramount. Now, I mentioned the importance of climate change. We're all talking about that today. Energy is at the heart of climate challenge, how we heat our homes, how we run our vehicles and power our devices. And electricity reliability, of course, is critical for Canada's economic growth and stability. We are seeing an increase, as Francis mentioned, in the frequency, the severity, and the impacts of adverse weather events. That is a very costly challenge, and a societal push and subsequent public policy move towards that low carbon economy, which will of course include more electrification. Estimates are that we will need 2 to 3 times current generation levels here in Canada. Canada's Finance Minister, Christina Freeland, this week described the shift to clean energy as a once-in-a-generation moment that Canada must seize. But again, the current grid infrastructure was not designed or built to handle that significantly increased demand for electricity. So in order to be able to achieve that, we need to think about renewable energy and storage technologies that work in Canada's climate. And so that innovation and technology is reshaping how we generate, deliver, and use electricity. So our artificial intelligence, smart grids, EVs, battery storage, and of course SMRs, as was mentioned earlier today. But each of those proposed solutions has unique skills and competency challenges as we look to upskill, reskill, and develop a workforce that can continuously adapt and innovate within that very rapidly changing environment. And remember, we work in an industry that for many decades did not change very quickly from skills and competencies perspective. But that skilled and trained workforce is an essential component to decarbonization. And while we're still trying to manage and need to manage our legacy systems, we are going to see new types of work and jobs evolve as a result of energy policies and technology advancements. So again, in order for that to happen successfully, the electricity sector in Canada is going to compete with other industries across the nation for workers. So since replacement of the current workforce is already putting pressure on recruitment, and we now have a new build-out requirement unlike anything we've ever seen, the workforce numbers simply are not there yet to respond to that challenge. I do want to reference what could be seen as a fourth driver of change. It's certainly something that is driving conversations with our employers, our unions, and our workforce themselves. And it is going to impact the electricity sector being seen as an industry of choice. And that's our ability to attract, recruit, and retain staff. Before COVID, many of us were talking about the future of work as if it were a decade or more away. Well, COVID's changed all of that. It's really accelerated many of those conversations. And since the pandemic, the world of work itself has evolved. And many organizations are scrambling to identify what today's workplace actually looks like. Expectations are different. Workers do not want to return to the same way of working as pre-pandemic. And so many employers, including in this sector, have implemented hybrid work models for their office workforce in some shape, way, or form. However, not everyone is going to find that this works for their business. And that may be a challenge down the line from a recruitment and retention standpoint. Perceived inequities between office and field staff, for example, regarding continued flexibility of working from home is a key concern. There is a risk that those who cannot work remotely are going to feel disadvantaged. Women, for example, already underrepresented in the sector, also risk becoming more invisible as a result of remote work. So there are ramifications to what this future of work looks like. On the recruitment side, we see employers bringing in initiatives such as referral bonuses, hiring bonuses, retention bonuses, and the like. But there is an issue with that as well. If new employees create internal inequities between new and existing employees. Wanted to touch on something else that's really important, and that is mental health. That was a growing concern amongst employers and society in general, even before the pandemic. And a top takeaway revealed during our recent Agents of Change national conference is that 42% of companies redesigned their employee assistance programs, their EAP programs, in 2021. I would say that wellness has become a core business priority as a result of the pandemic. And we've seen a major shift from an employer's responsibility for an employer's or an employee's physical and mental health while they're actually on the job to looking out for their well-being both on and off the clock. So those issues, not to mention conversations about productivity and data security, are going to be important for leaders to address if they are going to be employers of choice. And while things are slowly getting better, I would be remiss if I were to state that the demographic makeup of our sector has improved much since 2022, or indeed 2002. Women, Indigenous people, newcomers, people with disabilities, visible minorities, we are still struggling to attract or provide career opportunities for these groups of underrepresented workers. Youth representation in this industry remains chronically low. 10.5% of the Canadian labour force across industries is under 25. In the Canadian electricity sector, that number is 5%. From our Generation Impact report, we know that youth are also often completely unaware of the breadth of careers in this sector, and we have a lot of work to do. And I know one of our speakers is going to talk about some of the good things that are being done on that a little bit later. But this is a demographic we need to appeal to, and we need to do it while they're still in middle and high school, because if they lose interest in STEM at those ages, they're very likely to stream out of a career in this sector because of the technical nature of this roles. But it also provides an opportunity to increase diversity deep in the talent pipeline. Just a quick story, just to bring some of this messaging home. A friend's son is starting a trades program in one of our colleges, January of this year, so it just started. 21. He's the youngest student in his class. All of the others are 29 plus, and they're transitioning from other industries. They've lost a decade where they could have been working and earning and learning. But there's also no women in his class whatsoever. So wrapping it all up, just in the interest of time, the retirement rate in the electricity sector is 1.5 times the national average at a time when we want to grow new generation at a rate we haven't attempted since the early 80s. The labour market is tighter than it's been since the 1970s. And the only way to grow our workforce to meet this challenge is to appeal well beyond the usual recruitment pools, and also stop focusing on some of the short things that we've done, such as poaching, because it still happens, and retiree hire back strategy for longer term recruitment and retention and workforce growth challenges. So the new workforce is going to need to be technology savvy, technically competent, and it's going to need to reflect the social fabric of Canada and the many faces that this represents. That new workforce increasingly includes newcomers to Canada from a diversity of backgrounds, immigration will absolutely be critical, and indeed we're well positioned to do so. I know Francis had mentioned the great work being done by the sector in regards to supporting Ukraine, and we did a call to action last year for our employers to look to support and hire some of those folks coming in from the Ukraine, and I'm delighted to say that we actually have people working in place in the sector as a result of that today. So I'm going to wrap up again here on behalf of Electricity Human Resources Canada, EHRC, and we are the most trusted source for our labour market intelligence to help our industry deliver the insights and the programs and the resources to strengthen what I consider our most important asset in Canada's electricity sector, and that is, of course, our people. So with that, Jake, I'm going to pass back to you as moderator or on to our next speaker.